Uh, Hello everyone, good evening. Hello everyone. So, you know, any news or stuff on like what's happening, and I've been following this stream, and what's your feedback? Is it like being a bit too hard to follow, or like is it going in a good pace? Like, just wanted to hear your feedback. Being a bit too hard to. You can just like drop it in the chat. Hi Reshma. Okay, I think we can get started. Hi Akash Das. Okay, it's great to know. Yeah, sure. It's been a good, session for me, like the live streams that I'm doing, and I hope that you guys also feel that it's useful. And again, I know that at start it might be a bit hard to understand, like where we are headed and so on. But again, as we move on to like more streams, like it would make more sense and it would be an habit. And I think the collaboration would be much better. So yeah, we can just like figure out some sweet spot where we can just like do this in a good and efficient way. Yeah. Okay. So let's get started. Let me quickly like summarize what we have done so far. So I think this is the fifth session. So we have started this on Monday, 14th April, and we are this is again the fifth day. And so far, the first day we have discussed about the use case that we are trying to build, and what are all the business requirements in the sense like let's say what are all the features that the user is going to need, and what are all the technical specifications and the features that we are going to add in technical perspective, like how the LLM going to be served, how the app is going to connect with the LLM, and so on. So all those things, so we have discussed that in the first session. And in the second session, it was more about like setting up the repositories, just like giving the structure of how we are going to work on, how we are going to follow a streamline and seamless development process. So we have kind of like created a couple of repositories to have our front end and back end code. And in the third session, we have just like kind of started with writing simple APIs and Streamlit app. Just the base code that we can start with. Again, there are like so much work to do there. And yesterday we were like kind of integrated our LLM. So we have integrated Grok and Olama for now. So those are the things that we have discussed now. And in today's video, right? So we are going to go a bit deeper into this, where we are going to add a feature where the user will have an option called as model settings, where they can say that this is the model provider I want, and this is the model that I'm going to use from this model provider. Let's say that one of the provider that we have is OpenAI. We know that OpenAI has like different models, like the O3 model, O4 model. We have the 4O models and so on. So a user can, let's say, in the providers list, they can select OpenAI and then select like one of those models, or they can just, let's say, select Ollama and the models that we are providing, or they can also choose Grok and choose like one of the models that Grok provides. So that's what we are going to build. So now we will add Grok and Ollama, but this is done in such a way that it's scalable. So if someone tomorrow wants to add, let's say, OpenAI or Google APIs, they can easily do this by just adding it in the configuration file. So that's the reason why we have this configuration. So instead of hard coding the model details on the code, we are rather going to put it in the configuration file so that it's kind of easily scalable to different model providers and models as well. So that's the thing that we are going to discuss today. So you can just like drop, if you have any doubts or questions about this, you can just like quickly drop in the chat. Akash, so you have asked if the series is available. Yes, it's available. So you can go to the playlist section. So there I've created a playlist for live, or even you can just like open the channel. You would have videos, playlist, and all the section, and there will be a section called as live. So that has like all the streams that we have done. So you can check that out there. Going good, going at a good pace. Will we cover any image slash video related POCs use case in generative AI? So not in this specific use case. Maybe we can just like send the document as image and then process it with some multimodal LLM. Again, not sure still, but in the later POCs we can definitely like do something like that, right? So it's like, let's say we have a video, or you can extract, let's say, the content from it, the audio from it, and how you can summarize that, use LLM to summarize that, or something like that. We can just like think about some good POCs that we can work on. So we can definitely do that. So with that being said, let's open our PyCharm front end. So here I have this front end and the back end code. So this is our back end where we have the APIs and so on. So the all those stuffs are here. And this is the configuration file where we have this LLM, like the Grok and Ollama models. So in this Grok, these are the options that we are providing. Again, you can increase this list, but for now, this is the ones that we are using. And in my machine, I have these three models: Gamma 2 billion, DeepSeek Aron, and 5.3. So I'm running this on a 4 GB NVIDIA graphic card. So I think it's RTX 30 series or something. So it only has like a 4 GB graphic card. So I'm just like having this smaller models. But even like, I think CPU should also be fine. So I haven't ran this models on CPU, but you can test. But these are like pretty smaller models, like less than 2 GB. So it should be good even if we have CPUs or like smaller GPUs. So these are the ones that we are going to do. And what we are, the next step we are going to do is, right, so far what we have done is we have a Streamlit app. Let me, maybe I can run this and show this to you. So this is the fast API backend that we have. So where the user can send a question from the Streamlit interface, user interface, and we are going to receive that on the backend, send this to the LLM, and we are going to get a response. So if I just like show this to you, right? So how this would work is, let me start this AP backend server first. So this runs on an Ubicon server. So this would run on port 8000 that we have mentioned here. So now I'll open my backend where we have our Streamlit app running. So sorry, the front end thing. Yeah. So here we have this app.py, which is the Streamlit code. So here I'm going to say Streamlit run app.py. So this is going to run the Streamlit app for us. So this automatically opens. Let me open this in this particular browser. And this is how it looks. So this is what we have built so far. So we have a text box where the user can type in question, and then like they can just like it on answer. Let's say we ask like what is Streamlit, or like, what is AI. Let's say this is the question that we ask. So we click on this get answer. This is going to call the Ollama model that we have. So this request goes to the backend, and the current model that we are using is Ollama. So you can see this here. We have a script called as get LLM response. So there we have tested with Grok and Ollama model, DeepSeek Aron, and you get a response. So once you get your response, you kind of put it back in the Streamlit. And the idea here is that we are going to kind of scale this up to kind of have a production ready RAG application where let's say a student can upload bunch of notes. They can select a semester, they can select a subject, and they can upload it so that they have kind of a study partner, study pal kind of application is what we are building. So to this, what we are going to do is currently we are manually changing which models we are going to use. So here we have in the backend, we have, this is for Olama and we have commented out the Grok part, right? So here we are going to change this in such a way that the user can select whether they want to use Grok or Olama. If they are using Grok, within Grok, what's the model that they want to use, or within Olama, what's the model that they're going to use. So that's what we are going to build. So for that, we are going to kind of put a pop-up kind of a button here. So once they click on that button, we will kind of show a pop-up. Also, it's not very smooth and Streamlit, so rather than a pop-up, it would kind of look like a drop down, but it would like serve the purpose. So in this drop down, the user can select the provider in the sense Grok or Olama, OpenAI or Google, and once they select that, they can select the models of their choice within that provider, and they would get a response. This is just like, I'm not sure if you guys have used Perplexity, but Perplexity kind of does kind of the same thing. So they, for a question, you can select from these different models, and you'd be able to get the response. It's kind of like something similar to this. So the first step that we are going to do for that is create this pop-up button. It's quite some task because of slight complexity that we have in Streamlit. So let's just start with that particular implementation. So I'll stop this Streamlit app now. We can just keep this code as it is, and I'll create a new file, and I'll call this as app1.py. Okay, so this is app.py, the current working file. So I'm going to create a new one called as app1.py. So let me add this to Git as well. So later, if we want, we can save this. So now the next step is understanding how to build this button, but this is going to be a bit tricky, so I'll explain like why it's going to be that way. So for that, we need to understand something called as session state in Python. So that's important. So let's see like what's the significance of this. So here I'm going to import, let's say, Streamlit as CST. Okay, again, we're just creating a new app, so this is not in the same code that we have over here. So in this Streamlit, we can also make this like more standard with some like proper commands and like proper structure and so on. So I'm going to put this comment over here saying that this is for page configuration. Page configuration is nothing but giving a proper icon and name for this page and like what's the layout is going to be. So here we have like two layout options. One is wide and centered for Streamlit. If it's centered, everything is going to stay in the center. The title of this page is going to be study pal, and the icon is going to be this smaller robot icon. So this is what we have. Okay, and then let's say that we can just like use probably the same title. So I'll just like go here and copy that, which is st.title study pal application. I can just put it over here. So these are the page configuration. Now we are going to create a button next to this text box that we are seeing here. So the text box should be present over here, and we need a smaller button where the user can change the model. So in order to set up this layout, we can use Streamlit's what we call as columns, right? So I'll tell you like how we can build this. So let's say that we have this as, we can call this as layout, let's say, and we have columns as column 1 and column 2, and these are equal to st.columns. So I'll put a parenthesis here, and here I'm going to say 8 comma 1. So what this 8 comma 1 is, how much space the column 1 should take and how much space like the second column should take. So let's say if column 1 takes 8 units of space and column 2 takes like 1 unit of space. So that's the idea. I'll explain you like how all these things comes together. Like again, once we write this would make more sense. So we have the same thing, right? This question thing. So where the user is going to give a particular question, right? So let's have something like that. So we call this as question is equal to what we previously had is like we're going to use that st.text input, and you can write your question, but I'm going to put this within this column. So instead of saying st.columns, I'm going to say column1 dot text input. So it's again the same thing. It's going to be the same text box, but it's going to be present in first column. So I'll say column1 dot text input. Here we can say like what's your question, and like basically whatever we add over here. So here we can have the label and some placeholder, just some grayed out text here. These are like pretty simple stuff. So let's say this is what we add. And then in the second column, we are going to have a button. Okay. So that can be given as if column2 dot button. We can have a gear symbol here. So I'll just go to Google and search for this emoji DB, from which you can copy some emojis. So we can use a setting symbol, which is basically a gear icon. So I'll copy this, come back to my code, front end code. I'll paste it over here. So this is going to be my button, and we can add a parameter called as help that's going to mention like what this button is about when someone hover over that button. So I'll say select model settings. Okay, let's say this is what we have, and then let's say like this is what we have. So when someone clicks on this st, again when someone clicks on this button, we are going to display that st.success button output or model configuration path. Okay, so let's see how this looks like. So I'm opening my terminal. So this is called as app1.py. So I have to say streamlit run app1.py. So you have to make sure that the previous app, the app.py, is not running, because if it's already running, then there is like a conflict. So it basically means that some app is already running on the port 8501, which is the default port for Streamlit, and if you try to run this, it's going to say it's busy. So you have to make sure that the previous app is not running. So if you open this, if you go this, it's kind of not running. If you refresh this, it's going to throw an error because it's not running, right? So you have to make sure that this is not running. So in order to close that, all you have to write, like if the app is running, just press Control plus C. So that's going to stop whatever command or whatever app is running. So now let's run this app1.py, and this automatically opens. So now you see this, right? So we have a text box, and you have this uh, smaller button called as settings, which when I hover over this, it says select model settings. So as you can see, it's kind of like not in the same line, because this is the part where it's kind of starting. Like this is the label level, so this is the same level. This is the button would start. Again, you can change this, but you have to write some HTML and CSS code to mention like what's the pixel and what's the exact location this button has to kind of should be present in the screen. But it's like quite tedious, and we don't want to go there. So that's why like we are just like, we know that it's not aligned properly, but we are going to leave it as such. If it works, then it's fine for us for now. So later we can worry about like the looks of it, right? So we have a box and we have a button, and when this button is clicked, it should say this model configuration part. So later this is what we are going to change with the actual provider settings and the model settings. I'll refresh this. Now let's see what happens if we remove this column 1 and column 2. So here we have this column 1 dot text input, right? I'll just like remove this column thing and just this as well, and say st dot button, and here I'll say st dot button again. So now the code has changed. I'll come back to this. It says the source file change. I can click on this rerun, or I can simply refresh this page. This is what happens when you don't mention the columns. So Streamlit just like treats all these as like contents that should be present one below the other. So in order to handle that, we are adding column 1 and column 2 before this button as well as this text input. So we have this different widgets and buttons in Streamlit. So you can use this columns variable that you're creating, and you can just mention it to say that I want this to be present in this particular space. So that's the reason we are using that. Now maybe let's change this number and see like how this would look like. I'll put this as 5,5, and let's see how this one looks like. See, so half of the space is provisioned for this text input, and half of the space is provisioned for the settings input, because like both has the same number. If you want lesser space for this settings button, you can just like change this, like the one that we previously had, like 8 comma 1 now, 9 comma 1. So let's stick to 8 comma 1. So if you want a different look, you can just like play around with this number. So when I'm running this, it's going to change this. Okay. So now, again, this is just a placeholder, but we have to change this to select a provider as well as a model. There is this interesting thing about Streamlit where when a person clicks on a button, when a person, let's say, clicks on this button symbol, right, it's going to rerun the entire script. It's going to rebuild this entire page. So what happens is, in those cases, the variables that you have, it's going to get refreshed as well. So that's the problem that's present. I can just like show this to you visually so that it makes like more sense. So here I'll say that once this button is clicked, I'll remove this. And let's also create a list of models and providers. Again, later we would get these details from the backend. So in the backend, we have a file called as config.py, which has details on the providers. The providers are nothing but Grok and Olama in this case. So if you are adding OpenAI, you would just like put OpenAI over here and you would say that, you have GPT 3.5 and all those list of models in a list like this. Let's say for now we are just like working with Clock and Olama. So what we would do is here we have a endpoint, fast API endpoint that the Streamlit uses to send the user's question and get a response right from the text box. Later we will create another endpoint that would tell the Streamlit app what are all the supported models and what are all the supported providers. So it's going to come from this backend. But for now, for this initial development process, we can just like hard code this and then later we can remove this. So let's follow that. So I'll say uh, some constants. So let's say these are not going to change. So we can say this as like API details or something. So we have a URL for this. The API URL is this one. Let me put this in uppercase letters to be clear. So even this would come from a different configuration that's present in the Streamlit project directory, but again we can go there later. But for now, this API is running in our local. So this backend is running in our local in this particular host, which is this 127.0.0.1 C, which is the local host server, the local host thing, and 8000 is a port. So this is what we are mentioning in this API URL. And let's say for just this development sake, in order to build this button, I'm going to create two lists called as providers. So the providers are going to be Grok and Olama. Again, later we would replace this in such a way that all these details are coming from the backend. But for now, let's say the app supports two providers and the models it supports are Llama 3.3 or something. And then let's say it supports deep sea carbon. Let's say that these are the two models that we are providing support to. Now, once the user clicks on the settings symbol, we should show a drop down where the user can select one of these things and one of the models that we have. Okay, so later this should change. So Grok would support different models and Olama would support different models. So once they click on this provider, these should change, but again, we can deal with this a bit later. So that's not an issue. So in the settings thing, once they click on this button, we have to do something like with st.expander, like again, just use some emoji so that it looks good. We can maybe use this tools emoji that represents that. So this is going to be model settings, and when the button is clicked, this expander should be running and it should be true, right? And then we have two things. One is, let's say, the provider is equal to st.select box, and select box is going to take label as provider, the model provider per se, and the list of providers which we have created over here. Sorry. So this is should be options. Options is equal to provider and index is equal to 0. Index is nothing but when the select box opens, whether the first value should be selected or the second value should be selected. So we just give the index of this list. So by default, you like which provider you want to be selected. So that's why we have this indexing. So similarly, I'm going to create a new thing and I'm going to call this as models. So again, for selecting the models, and here we are going to say models. Okay. Okay, it's just model, and this is going to be the model that they're going to select. So once they select this, we are going to say st.success, uh, you know, using this particular provider. So we are using a substitute string. So if when you put if, we can replace the string with the actual variable value. So if they select grok, we are going to say that using grok and this particular model, and put a hyphen and say that here we are going to replace it with model. So we are just like replacing two things. So once the user selects a provider and a model, we are going to display the provider's name, either grok or olama, and the model's name, either llama 3.3 or deepseek r1. So this is what we have built. Now let's see how this thing works, and this is where the session state thing comes into play. So the app is running, so all I can do is just go to the app page, refresh this. Now it won't show this st.success. I'll refresh this. Now we have a text box, and then we have this gear icon to configure the model, right? So when I click this, it's going to open a drop down, kind of a pop-up. When you click this again, it should kind of go back. It shouldn't like appear now. This is one issue that's happening because of the session state. And when you click on this Olama, like you can select anything, it's going to kind of disappear. This is a problem. And again, you can test this out. Even when you select a particular model, it's going to go away. But ideally, what should happen is like when you click this, you should be able to select a model, and after that, you should see like the selected models like in this particular string. So what happens here is, as I said, there are some flags in this. When this button is clicked, right? So when this button is clicked, we have this condition called as column dot button, right? When the button is clicked, this would give the value as true, and after that only this part runs. Now what happens is, you open this, you refresh this page, you see this button, so you click this. So now this if condition would get the condition as true, and this code gets executed. This expander is nothing but this particular box that's getting expanded. You can kind of like close this over here and so on. So we have an expander here, and then it displays this provider select box, model select box, and so on. But whenever you interact with the objects that's present in the Streamlit thing, like just like this text box we have, when you select something, the Streamlit tab is going to render this entire page again, right? So that's the problem. So what we have to do is, for all this interaction that happens, we have to maintain the variable values and the flags. Here the flag is the button is clicked. It should retain that memory that a button is clicked. So we are going to save all these flags and the variables in a place called a session state. So let's see how we can do that. So this may be a bit complex, but again, as you build like more Streamlit apps, it would like make kind of like more sense. But yeah, that's the idea. It's just like, remember this as like when we interact with this, Streamlit is going to render the entire thing again. It's going to rerun this entire script. So that's why like some things are getting kind of reset. So that's the problem. So let's see how we can create this session state variables. So here we have this part where we have this API details and constants and so on, right? And after that, the layout of this page starts. So here I'll add another comment and I'll say that initialize session state. So when you put all these things in a session state, it's going to retain all the variable values that the user has given, all the selections that they have made, and all the flags. So if the button is clicked, it's going to again re-render the page, but it's going to remember whether the button is clicked or not, and then it's going to remember like what's the provider that the user chose and what's the model that they chose. So all these information are going to be remembered. Okay, so now for this we can say st dot session state, which is again comes within Streamlit. I'm going to say this as set default show settings false. I'll explain you like the purpose of this. We have to initiate two other things. One is st.session state dot set default provider, and then say providers of 0, st dot session state dot set default again. So here we are going to save the model detail. So session state is kind of just like a dictionary, which is going to save all these flags and the selections that the user is making. So what we are doing is, in this dictionary, think about this as a dictionary. So in the session state dictionary, we are having keys like show settings that's going to remember whether the user has clicked on the gear icon or not, whether it should kind of like basically like remember what's happening in the click of a button. And then this part, session state, we have provider and model. This is for Streamlit to remember the selection given by the user for provider as well as model. It's basically like it should remember what's the value chosen by the user for provider as well as model. So now we are going to put all these things in the session state. Okay, so that would be the next step. So it's like kind of the minor changes like to whatever we have done before. So here we would say again, so here we say that show settings is equal to false. That means when the app starts, show settings would be false, and then we can change this later. And again, when the Streamlit app runs for the first time, it's going to take the default value of this provider. This values you are seeing here, right? So this provider and model is nothing but the value of the text box that the user is going to select. So here we are setting a default value, right? So that's what we are saying here as well. So what's the default value of this provider and the model should be? So that's what we are mentioning here. Provider 0 is nothing but the first value in this list, which is grok, and this is like first value in this models list, which is this llama 3.3. So we are setting that up, and after that in this column button we have to say st.session state dot show settings, which is the thing that we have created over here to remember that interaction with the settings button. So here, and then I have to say something like not st dot session state dot show settings. Okay, so I'll explain you, like this may look a bit confusing, but I'll explain you in detail like what's the purpose of this once this particular code is done. So the next thing that we would do is with st dot expander, so all these things would remain the same, and then here can add a comment, maybe model settings. This can come outside. So instead of checking the button click, we are going to check the settings check. Okay, so here I'm going to say if st dot session state dot show settings with st dot expand, we already have it, so it's going to be this, and then we can just like add all the variables. To add this variables here, just say that provider everything is there, right? Just put st dot session state, that is all. So copy this, say provider is this, model is this, and while displaying this we can say st dot session state dot provider and st dot session state dot model. It's basically whenever you're accessing the variables or flags, you always should mention that as st dot session state and the variable name or the flag name, the settings name or whatever it is. Before we have just given the variable, now you just have to say along with that st dot session state, and again you have to change this index and all those aspects as well. And this also should change because this is where it's going to remember when it re-renders. It needs to remember like what's the selected thing is, so we can change this as well. So in this index I'm going to say something like providers dot session state, sorry, providers dot, it should give the index of session state dot provider. Okay, this looks good. So similarly For models as well, we should have something like this. So label is model, options is models, index is just nothing but like to remember whether it's chosen thing is grok or olama, right? So we have to give that index. So all we are trying to do is this is the part like whatever the user has chosen. So this st.session state stores whatever the user has selected, whether it's grok or olama. So when you put it through this list.index, it's going to give this index number. I'll show this to you in a separate script so that would make more sense. Remember that the output of this providers.index says st.session_state.provider, it's going to be an integer value. Like in this case, it can be 0 or 1 because we only have like two values in both providers and models. So I'll just have to change this to models.index st session state. Here it should be models. So model like the variable that you're seeing here. This is giving me an error. So we have st session state and everything. Options is model, label is model, index. Okay, we are getting this issue. Okay, and then st dot session state. Let me remove the indentation and see. Interesting. Let's see what's the error is. We have Streamlit imported, but it's not recognizing that. Okay, so we have st.expander, st.session_state.provider model, st.selectbox. Let me open this again. This probably should go with it. See. So, okay, let's maybe run this and see if this issue persists. So we have options as models, index as models, and so on. For some reason, the variables are not getting recognized. I have no idea why this is happening. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I already add this down, so it should, because of this extra parenthesis that we, okay, that's okay. So we have this labels, options, providers, the list of providers that we have to pass, and this is, as I said, it's like to remember what's the index is. Similarly, we have this models thing. In this models, we have label as model, index as model, and when you run this, this is going to persist like whatever the input that the user has given, and later it's going to print like the particular model and the provider that the user has given. So let's run this and then we can try to understand what's happening here. So I'll open this terminal. It's already running. So let's go back to this browser and rerun this. Okay, so this is where the user has to write some question, but again, if they want to change this model, so they can click on this. Now you're seeing this, right? If I click on this again, it should disappear. It's again kind of like a pop-up or drop-down thing that we are working with. So I'll again click this, but previously this wasn't happening. When I click it, it wasn't like working as expected. Now if I choose, let's say olama, it's staying, right? And if I choose DeepSeek, it says like whatever thing that we have chosen. And then again, I can change this to grok, I can change this to llama 3.1. Let's say we choose with olama and DeepSeek. I click this again. When I open this again, it's going to retain whatever the values that we have selected. So this is what we were basically trying to achieve. So the user should be able to select this button, click on this button, choose a model of their choice, and that should be remembered. Again, if they are going to refresh the screen, then it shouldn't retain that. That's kind of a next session. But whenever something is happening without clicking on that refresh, so that's what we call as a particular session. So we are going to maintain like whatever the choices that they have made, whatever the selections that they have made. So now let's try to understand what's happening in this code, like as we try to, work with this buttons and other stuff. So when the app starts, we are storing the state of all the variables and the flags. Here, the main flags that we have are show settings, which is going to take either true or false. But initially, we are giving the value as false. So set default is nothing but initially have the set show settings value as false, and initially set the provider details to first value in this list called as providers. So here the value will be crop, and initially the model variable should have the value as this 0. The index 0 basically means llama 3.3. So that's why when you refresh this page and you open this settings button, this is what you're seeing. So this show settings, right? When this show settings is false, you shouldn't see this expander, right? Because if this is coming as false, this entire code doesn't run because it's present in a if condition. But if the show settings is changed to true, then it should run this. That means when it runs, it should display the expander and show the text box to select this provided models and so on. So at first, the show settings value is false because that's how we are initializing this. So that's why when the page starts, you're not seeing this expander and the session state and all that, right? So when I click this is the expander, right? Not this button, but this entire thing. This object is what is called as an expander. But you're not seeing this expander when you refresh this page, right? That's because, as I said, the show settings is kind of configured to show false. And now let's understand when does this show settings turns to true. So we have the text input in column 1, we have the button to in column 2 and so on. So if column 2 dot button, that means this if condition is satisfied when a user click on this gear button, the button that we are seeing over here. So when they click this part of this code is going to run. The line number 27 is going to run. So basically what happens is it's going to change this show settings from false to true so that we can see the expander. That's the entire thing. Okay, so this is how it's going to be. So when the app starts, we are going to hide the expander because we have set the show settings to false, provided with all those details and so on. But when this button is clicked, change the flag of show settings. Now we have to display the expander. This expanded is equal to true. What it means is, like, when it appears, when you click this, you see this expanded option. You are not seeing this non-expanded collapsed version, right? If you want to see this collapsed version, you just have to change this flag, the expanded flag, to false. Then it would just like you would just like see this when we click on it. So I'll refresh this. When the user clicks on this, again they have to expand this. So this is that true or false, right? So that's dictated by this expanded parameter. Okay, let's put this to true. Let's refresh this. And once you click this, you would see the expanded version. Now what happens is, so the user clicks on the settings button, and this if condition is now satisfied. Ours, we are just using a not to convert this false to true. So it's like when the user clicks this, we are just like inversing this boolean value from false to true, and now this condition gets satisfied. We see the expander. So the main functionality here is, don't show the expander at the start of this page, only show it when a user clicks on this. So when the user clicks on this, we are changing the flag of show settings to true, and then we display this expander, and then you can just like select like Olama is what you need or DeepSeek is what you need. And as I said, right, all these text box select box values are stored in variables. So this provider text box you're seeing, right? So this is saved in a variable called as provider. And the model text box that you're seeing over here, the value that we select is saved in a variable called as model, that's present over here. Again, as I told you, whenever a new button is clicked, when something is selected on the select box, Streamlit is going to rerun this entire thing. So the variable values will be lost. So just like saving this show settings, we are saving this provider details as well as the model details to this session state variable. It's basically to persist whatever the input that's the user has given in the app. So that's the main purpose of this. So provider, it's just like going to give you like what's the indexes, right? So if I just like create a new file called as check.py, and let's create an index. Maybe we can work with the same thing. So let's say this is the list we have. And if I say something like this, so the same code that we had, providers st.index provider thing. So provider is nothing but the value that the user has chosen. So let's say the value chosen by the user is grok. This would be replaced by, let's say, grok, and print this. So when grok is selected, 0 is the value that we are going to pass to the index. So this is how it remembers. So the provider selection is saved in the session state called as st.session.provider, and when you put it through this provider.index, it's going to give you like what index it is in. And now when the user, right, so let me show this again. So we refresh this, we select this, and let's say the user is selecting Olama. This Olama value is going to get saved in this session state dot provider. It's going to remember that. So how it's remembering that is, we are accessing the chosen index using this particular code called as providers.index session state. So all the things that we are doing is pretty much to persist whatever the values that the user has chosen. That is like pretty much it. I know that this is a bit confusing, but as I'm like I've already mentioned, right, this only makes sense as you kind of try to write this code by yourself, looking at this, just like type this code and try to understand each of this line in detail. So this was like pretty confusing for me as well, like when I first was building a chatbot and trying to see like why the widgets are kind of disappearing. So I had a hard time to understand each of these things. So I know that this can be a bit challenging to understand, but again, just like go through this code line by line. If required, you can just like put this entire thing in ChatGPT and just like ask it to explain in a very, very simple way. So you would kind of like understand like the whole aspects. For main takeaway is that to remember that it's just to make sure that all the values are kind of like persistent. The user chosen value are persistent. So that's the thing. So once they do that, we are going to save that values so that like we remember the model settings. Again, everything goes kind of once we refresh this, just like ChatGPT, right? So if you choose a reasoning model, so once you refresh this, everything is going to be new. So it's kind of like just like that. So this is the step, and then we can just like use whatever we have already done, right? So we add this st dot button, get answer, and so on. We can just like kind of put this thing itself. So shouldn't have any issues here. Let me just like put it in a more clean way. So this is to get answer from let's say API. Okay, so it's just the same thing. We have this response request dot post this thing, right? So response request dot post. Let me just copy this and paste it over here. Again, we need to create another button. So we add a button called as get answer. Can we copy and paste it over here, and then response is equal to request dot post. So once this button is clicked, we have to call this API. So let's import this request library. Again, these codes are like something that we have done already, so nothing complex here. So same thing, and say result is equal to response.json and so on, right? And say this as users question. So I think we have need rename this to question to have better clarity. And API URL, it's in uppercase. That's why it's showing an error. So we can change this to API URL. Put this in a single line. Okay. Okay, and finally we can say answer is equal to, so we have result is equal to response.json and answer is equal to this, right? And finally we can display this as st.success, and within this we can just like display the answer that we got. So you can just put st.success is equal to answer. Okay, so it's going to display this. So for now, again, we have just like hard coded the provider details and the model details. As the next step, what we would do is we would create another endpoint in the backend code where this list, right? So here, just like this post API that we have created to get an answer, you would create an endpoint to get the provider details and the model details. So we would create like another get endpoint or like post endpoint. I think get is sufficient because we're not going to send any details here. So I think get is sufficient. So instead of having this list here, we would call this API just like calling this ask API, right? The one that you're seeing here. So we would like create another endpoint and we would call that and get these two lists. And then that would be then just like passed on to this options thing. And you would see like the actual providers and the actual model that you have, like, instead of seeing this hard coded values. But for now, no matter what the user is selecting, we are just anyway are going to use this model that the backend does, where the backend is kind of now using Olama and the DeepSeek R1. Let's say I want to change this to Grok itself. Can do this. Let's comment Olama. This is to save the API key and comment this. Comment this one. Yeah. So now this one uses the Grok API keys. Let's see. So uses Llama 3.1 8 billion instance. And let's see how this works. So I'll open my front end. So the app should be still running. So I'll refresh this. Just to get that field, I'll try to change, let's say, to Olama and let's say the Llama 3.1. I can close this. I can verify if the models, like values are persisting. So we can close this. I can type in like, let's say, what is deep learning. Okay. So again, this is going to call the Grok model, but this is what we are going to configure. So once the user has chosen whether it's OLAMA or Llama 3.3, right? So that setting would be propagated to this backend's get LLM response thing. So we would choose like whatever the model the user want to use, and then send a response. So based on the user input given in this user interface, this part of the code it's going to change dynamically whether it should use Llama 3.1 from chat grok or whether it has to use chat Olama. So this is the idea behind the like the integration of these two. But for now this is just like kind of like in placeholder. It doesn't work now, but this is the functionality. So I can click on this get answer. That's going to call the grok API and it's going to give the result. So this is the next feature that we have kind of like using. And yeah, so okay, I think it's still using the DeepSeek R1 because we didn't refresh this API, I guess. Yeah, so that's why. So I'll stop this and I can or rerun this. Now you shouldn't change this thing when you ask a question. So let's come back here, refresh this, and ask the same question. What is deep learning? Click on get answer and you would see like the output. So this one is basically coming from the Grok. Previously, it was still, even though we have changed the code, it was coming from Olama because the change wasn't reflected as the AP was already running. So this is the idea. So now we have worked on the user interface part to select a model. The next part is just two things. One is how we are going to get the provider details from the config file that you have in the backend. So for that, we are going to write a API here, and based on again, in turn, based on the user's input, how the backend is going to switch between the different models that it has access to. Like how it's going to use, let's say, Olama's DeepSeek Aruna, or how it's going to use Grok's Llama 3.18 billion instant. Like how it's going to do that. So these are the two things like we would probably do in the next steps. So for now, I think this is enough for today. I can just like quickly replace this original app.py file that we had with this particular script. Yeah, and I think I'll just like close this check API. So we don't need these two files. So I'll just safely delete these things. And then we can just like push this. So I'll say git space add space dot, or I can just say git space add space app.py. So git status to just make sure that no other files are getting changed. So only the app.py file is getting changed, like all the modifications that we did. And here I'll say git commit m front end changes for model selection. And finally we can say git push origin. So you're working on dev environment, so git push origin dev. So all these changes would be pushed. And in the backend we also add a minor change. So instead of Olama we are using the grok model. So I'll just open my terminal again, clear everything, again run this git add git status to check like what's changing. So only the get LLM response is changing. So in the commit we can say it's using grok LLM in get response, and finally say git push origin depth. So those are the two changes, but this is again minor change. It's like not that important, but the main change is like what we have done in the front end in the Streamlit app. So this is the progress for today. As I said, like it's not done yet, so it's only like halfway through. So the next step is like how we are going to get like the real provider details, model details, and how this is going to be reflected in the backend, right? So there are two tasks. One is write a API to give the list of providers and the models available, and then once the selection is made, send it back to the backend, use whatever model that the user want to use. So those are the two things that we are going to update, and then we are good to go. So whatever questions the user asks, it's going to be like we are going to use like whatever the model that they have selected. So these are the two things. So any questions? I know that the session state may sound a bit kind of tricky. Again, as I said, just go through this code line by line, put it to ChatGPT if you want to get a detailed understanding. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it that I wanted to discuss for today. So the next session we can have on Monday. So it's not have the session on Saturday and Sunday probably. So we can connect back on Monday, do a recap. So I'll maybe put a short video either on Saturday or Sunday explaining like whatever the progress we had for, let's say, for week one. So we can like clearly document the progress that we are doing, so that it's kind of like better for us to understand like what exactly we are building, like what's the progress is like, on a week on week basis, so we can like do those things. So I hope everyone is clear until this point. So if you have any doubts, you can mention it in the chat, or again if you have any other questions, like please, you can put it there. So yeah, we can just like stay here for another 5 minutes or like that, depending upon the questions. Yeah, make videos for Olama integration with Langflow. Okay, I think I haven't done anything on that, but I'll definitely look into that. Okay, you have said remove the bracket. Okay, didn't see the chat at that point. We had a Spanish video. Can I generate Arabic subtitles using the LLM models we learned today? Uh, yeah. So I think not sure if all the models, but most of the models support multiple languages, especially the OpenAI models as well. I think other models support it as well. So it's like in the system message, you have to say that, let's say something like you are a helpful assistant who converts or who translates, let's say Spanish text to Arabic text. So you say that, and then the things that you have to do are capture the audio from the video, convert it into text. So for that, you can use a model called as Whisper. So OpenAI has given a, you know audio to text model called as Whisper. It's really good. Again, maybe in one of the POCs we would use that to build a voice assistant kind of a thing. So it's like extract the audio from the video, convert this audio into text, put it through a LLM, and convert it to like whatever language you need. That's how you do the translation. But again, it's quite a bit of a task to put it back to the video. You have to make sure the timings are proper. Like that's the big task. Like how you're going to determine the timing. So you need like separate system for that, and like you have to put a overlays. I don't think it's a difficult thing, but it's like the timestamp thing would be like a bit, yeah. So that's one thing that you probably have to figure out. But it's like convert to audio to text, put it through a LLM to get the translation, and then you are good to go from there. So any other questions? Okay, so if not, we can wrap this session today. So yeah, thanks everyone. Let's meet on Monday. Bye.